What's going on, my fellow designers? Welcome back to D-Life HD. This is Victor, and today we're going to be taking a look and reviewing Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, a game that takes place 100 years before the setting of Breath of the Wild. So without any further delay, let's jump right into it.
Switch it up. Switch it up. I was a worker, had to upgrade to a boss. Used to live in the hood, but had to upgrade to a loft. Switch it up.
Starting off, let's look at the game modes. Hyrule Warriors is a hack and slash of sorts, and so you're going through a pretty linear style of a story, and the game modes are relatively limited. Now, the map is divided into main story missions, and then you have little side missions you can do that have smaller tasks. So whereas in a bigger mission where you have an epic battle and you have multiple objectives to do with a smaller side quest, all you have to do is you can jump in for maybe 5 to 10 minutes and just do one singular objective. On top of that, you have different types of gathering quests where you have to deliver different types of mushrooms and meats and fishes, different items that you would find in Breath of the Wild itself. And you can do these missions and you will unlock things as a reward for doing so. So the game modes, I would say, are divided into mainly those. On top of that, you can pilot the Divine Beasts, which are ginormous mechanical type creatures, which we'll dig into when we get to the story, and these are side missions on their own that you can actually do. So mainly you're playing this very linear story type missions, but you also have the option to do side missions and gathering quests and Divine Beast challenges. Some of these different challenges can be rather difficult and will upgrade your character a lot, so that way when you actually want to go back and do a main story mission, you are rewarded for going off and doing the side missions. Moving right along, let's discuss the UI and graphics. Starting off with the UI, wow, I'm bewildered at this game. Now, we got to see this within the showcase that they had at Nintendo Treehouse Live, and we also had a demo, which I had a video on. If you haven't checked that out, go ahead and pause this one and go check out that demo review type thing that I did. But the UI is directly replicated from Breath of the Wild itself. It feels like it's a series of games, which I absolutely love, even though they're two totally different styles of games. The UI has the same sound effects, it's divided the same way, and it just feels really fluid with Breath of the Wild itself. And it feels like something I've been playing for quite a while, and I love the familiarity. The graphics themselves take on so well from Breath of the Wild. They mesh together really well, even though you're playing, as I said earlier, a very different style of game. Everything feels like it could take place in the same world. It's cel-shaded, it's bright, it's colorful, it's very beautiful. Now, one thing about the graphics is, when you're playing in two-player mode, which is an option, it does become a little bit muddy and blurry. The game could use some polish. There's a lot on screen, so you will see slowdown in the graphics. You'll see frames being dropped at certain points, and overall it can become difficult depending on the period of what you're playing, but typically the cel-shaded style really pushes forward amongst the other little technical hiccups that do occur. The cutscenes themselves are fantastic, beautifully edited, and very, very similar to the style of cutscenes that we saw in Breath of the Wild. Again, I'm going to say this over and over again, but the games feel like they belong in the same family, and I absolutely love that. So there might be some minor issues, in my opinion, with the graphics themselves, with blurring and that type of thing, but overall I would say I love the style. Alright, let's get to the core of this game, the controls and gameplay. Now, the controls themselves, they're rather different from Breath of the Wild, where some things do carry over, like being able to use your bow and shield surfing and just general hacking and slashing. The actual root of the control scheme is drastically different from Breath of the Wild itself. It is very much in line with other Warriors and other Musou games. So, if you've played those games, it's going to transfer over extremely well. They have added certain aspects that will be familiar with Breath of the Wild though, so I feel like if you've played a Warriors game and you're interested in this one, or you've played Breath of the Wild and you're interested in hearing about the past, you'll be able to adjust to the controls relatively quickly depending on where your background is. I love the controls. You have Y and X as your main attacks. You can use B to run away and dash. A is to activate your special. And then on top of that, you have, depending on your character, a special other type of move you can use by clicking ZR. The ZL button resets the camera. The L and R buttons act as runes and special moves as well. So if you were to hold down the L button, you can activate different elemental attacks like fire, ice, and lightning, and healing, which you can get by picking up apples and different fruits along the way, or you might be able to collect different types of elemental powers that allow you to use those in battle. And then also you have the runes from Breath of the Wild. For those who maybe haven't played Breath of the Wild, although I'd assume most of you watching have, runes were these special physics-based abilities that you got from playing the game. You had bombs, you had the ability to freeze things in time, you had the ability to make ice structures, and you had the ability to use a magnetic ability that let you move giant metal bricks and things like that. And all of that is in this game. Every single different character uses all these different runes differently, but all of the general sense from Breath of the Wild carries over to this game. The main gameplay will have you doing these large story open sections where you have smaller objectives. There are different camps centered around the map, and so one of your objectives might be go take out this camp and claim it as your own, or maybe a boss has spawned inside the map and you have to go take them out. Depending on where the story goes, which I'd say, compared to maybe other ones of this style, Warriors games that is, Age of Calamity is more story focused. Depending on what's happening around the story, the gameplay will vary, but most of the time you'll see yourself going through these large, open sections of the map and just hacking away at tons of enemies. It's actually hilarious because in Breath of the Wild, you can only play as Link, and you're going out and taking out maybe 5 or 6 enemies within a camp. And then in this one, you're taking out as many as thousands of enemies all at once. So it very much leans towards the warrior style of gameplay. But I would say, as I mentioned earlier, if you've come from a Warriors background or a Zelda background, I think you're going to find this interesting, but for different reasons. Now, let's move on to the music and sound.
This is technology, the likes of which I've never laid eyes on.
One thing that was lacking from Breath of the Wild was an amazing soundtrack. I got to watch the January of 2017 Switch announcement type showcase, and at the end they showed this epic trailer for Breath of the Wild, and it had this fantastic scoring along with the trailer. But that song that they used for the trailer never actually appeared in the game, and that song still brings me to tears now because it's just very well composed. And so an epic score following along an epic journey is something that I was really looking forward to in Breath of the Wild, but it never really came. And I have since adjusted to the very delicate and limited soundtrack of Breath of the Wild, mainly centered around the piano, but I've still always wanted something very grand. And I can wholeheartedly say Hyrule Warriors has delivered on that. It's got an amazing soundtrack, I have to say it. I am very, very happy to have this soundtrack. And it adds to the depth and urgency of the game, because it's kind of about the apocalypse, basically, and we'll get to that in the story section. But the music just lends well to that story. And you're going to different biomes. You're going up to the snowy mountains, or down to the desert, or in the volcano area at Death Mountain, or all these different types of biomes. and the music changes. It's all very orchestrated, but it changes depending on where you are, leaning into instruments that might be centered from different cultures that we might have in the real world. And so I absolutely love the soundtrack. In fact, I've got this one song from the first Goron mission you do at Death Mountain. It's just, for some reason, it's stuck in my head, and it's been looping this whole weekend. I've got a chance to play this game. So the epic orchestral soundtrack that I've always wanted from Breath of the Wild is finally pushing through in Age of Calamity. On top of that, all the sound effects from Breath of the Wild are transferred over to this game, and the sound design is done really well. Even when you're just on the map, you'll hear sound effects like you're standing out in the middle of the woods. It's very immersive, and I absolutely love it. They also got basically, I believe, all of the original voice actors to come back and do this game. I'm sure they paid them a lot of money, considering how well Breath of the Wild did. But you've got all the original voice talent, and it's really good. I'm still not a big fan of the voice actress that plays Zelda. I don't know why. That's just my opinion. But overall, I think the voice acting is done really well, and it lends itself to the story itself. Extremely fantastic. Alright, and we're going to jump into the story of the game, of course, with no spoilers. Now, Age of Calamity is a little bit unique. Again, I'm going to try not to get into spoilers here. Absolutely not. I'm not that kind of person. But for those who have just started the game, you will see that there is a time travel element. So, unfortunately, I do not deem the story of this game at all canon to Breath of the Wild, which is probably my biggest disappointment in the game as a whole. I was really looking forward to having a actual legitimate canon prequel to Breath of the Wild. But that said, the story elements that are there that aren't related to the time travel aspect of the overarching story are awesome, and they're good to see. The characters that we briefly got to experience in Breath of the Wild's small flashback segments really come to life. You know, I love the champions, and it's good to really get to know them better as they bring forth full dialogue and interaction with each other. The main story itself, for those who are unaware, the Calamity Ganon, this vicious, vile beast who has finally come forth. This is basically the third form of Ganon, I guess, we've gotten in the franchise. We've gotten normal Pig Ganon, Ganondorf, and now Calamity Ganon, who is basically the most incredible and awe-inspiring Ganon yet, is seeking to take over Hyrule with the help of Rogue Sheikah, which is an ancient race in Hyrule, to take over the entirety of the kingdom. And so it's up to Link and Zelda and 4 different champions from the main 4 races throughout all of Hyrule to band together and finally stop Calamity Ganon. Now, for those of us who have actually played Breath of the Wild, we know how that story arc goes, but all I can say so far is it's a little bit different in Hyrule Warriors, how the story plays out compared to what we actually see in Breath of the Wild. As I've said, this is not exactly a canon story. It's kind of just it may have happened this way. So these 4 champions that I mentioned earlier, they have the opportunity to pilot these giant mechanical beasts, and I love Power Rangers, so a lot of those feelings kind of carry over into this game. Getting to play as these giant mechanical beasts, and so they were chosen by Zelda and the King of Hyrule as the guardians of Princess Zelda and of all of Hyrule. And so 4 champions from the 4 different races are chosen to pilot these giant creatures that they uncovered. And you actually, as I mentioned earlier, get to play as each character piloting these giant mechanical beasts, and they're these really large-scale fights where you might be knocking out tens of hundreds of people on the ground. When you're actually in these giant beasts, you're taking out literal thousands. It's really awesome. So the story is very delicate, and I'm going to just leave it at that brief little introduction. I definitely want to say, if you haven't played Breath of the Wild, go check it out. It's got an awesome storyline that kind of jumps back to a lot of the events of this game, and this game explains partly what could have happened, but as I said, it's not necessarily canon. That said, let's jump into the final rating. I'm going to go over some pros and cons right here. Starting off with a negative, because I want to get to the positive last so we end on a good note. The negative aspects of this game are a slightly disappointing story to me personally. I'm not a huge fan of where they decided to go with this. I know that the creator of Zelda was working firsthand with the people who were on staff working on this game at Omega Force, which is the developers. And so I wish the story could have been better, but that's okay. We don't get to experience great stories in all games necessarily. Second, like I said, there's some frame issues where it's not necessarily at a locked 30 frames per second. It dips down even in the cutscene sometimes. And I know for a lot of people that's going to completely subtract from the fun of the game. It doesn't personally bug me, but if that's something that you hate in games, you might want to hold off on this one and wait for a patch. It's potentially not going to be patched, but I would assume they're going to be working on it post. And also there is some blurring and some fuzziness to things that are off in the distance, especially when you're playing in 2-player mode. So if that graphical sort of hiccup really bugs you, I would definitely recommend you stay away from this game. Moving on to the pros, which far outweigh the cons in my opinion. It is an extremely fun game, especially in multiplayer, going around and hacking and slashing against these hordes of monsters. All the bosses feel extremely fun and unique because they have their own sort of combat style. That said, also the characters themselves feel so diverse, and there's a lot of extra fun characters that you wouldn't have expected, people that you know from Breath of the Wild itself. So if you're into that lore aspect, I highly recommend this game. Also, even though it doesn't necessarily feel completely canon, there is a really engaging story to be had here if you take it on its own. With that said, I think we're going to wrap this video up. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Let us know down in the comments of this video what you thought. We love talking to you guys. Remember to like and subscribe for more videos like these. Also, check the description for a link to our community Discord. We have lots of fun discussion in there and would love to have you. Lastly, check out our Twitter for gameplay on the latest releases, but most importantly, always remember to stay 1-up.